1809, a man named Charles Hercules Ebbets began secretly buying up adjacent parcels of land in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, including the site of a garbage dump called Pigtown, because of the pigs that once ate their fill there and the stench that still filled the air. He hoped eventually to build a permanent home for the lackluster baseball team he had once worked for and now owned. The team was called the Trolley Dodgers, or just the Dodgers, after the way their devoted fans negotiated Brooklyn's busy streets. In 1912, construction began. By the time it was completed, Pigtown had been transformed into Ebbets Field, baseball's newest shrine, where some of the game's greatest drama would take place. In the years to come, Dodger fans would see more bad times than good, but hardly care. Listen to the southern cadences of a pioneer broadcaster and witness firsthand baseball's finest moment, when a black man wearing the number 42 trotted out to first base. In 1955, after more than 4 decades of frustration, Brooklyn would finally win a world championship, only to know just 2 years later the ultimate heartbreak as their team moved to a new city 3,000 miles away, leaving an empty shell in Flatbush and an even emptier spot in the soul of every Brooklyn fan. It measures just 9 inches in circumference, weighs only about 5 ounces, and is made of cork wound with woolen yarn, covered with 2 layers of cowhide, and stitched by hand precisely 216 times. It travels 60 feet 6 inches from the pitcher's mound to home, and it can cover that distance at nearly 100 miles an hour. Along the way, it can be made to twist, spin, curve, wobble, rise, or fall away. The bat is made of turned ash, less than 42 inches long, not more than 2 3/4 inches in diameter. The batter has only a few thousandths of a second to decide to hit the ball. And yet the men who fail 7 times out of 10 are considered the game's greatest heroes. It is played everywhere, in parks and playgrounds and prison yards, in back alleys and farmers' fields, by small boys and old men. Raw amateur amateurs and millionaire professionals. It is a leisurely game that demands blinding speed. The only game in which the defense has the ball. It follows the seasons, beginning each year with the fond expectancy of springtime and ending with the hard facts of autumn. Americans have played baseball for more than 200 years. While they conquered a continent, warred with one another and with enemies abroad, struggled over labor and civil rights and the meaning of freedom. At its heart lie mythic contradictions, a pastoral game born in crowded cities, an exhilarating democratic sport that tolerates cheating and has excluded as many as it has included. A profoundly conservative game that often manages to be years ahead of its time. It is an American odyssey that links sons and daughters to fathers and grandfathers. And it reflects a host of age-old American tensions between workers and owners, scandal and reform, the individual and the collective. It is a haunted game in which every player is measured against the ghosts of all who have gone before. Most of all, it is about time and timelessness, speed and grace, failure and loss, imperishable hope, and coming home.
Here's a pitch, it's a slow curve, low, and the babe swings. It's a long run. It's in there. Another home run for the Bambino. So the babe hits his second homer of the day.
Feller starts that windup. Here's the pitch for the second strike. Here's the pitch. Swings on a low fastball for strike three.
And now comes up Joe DiMaggio. He connects a long ball going out into left field. Medwick's under it, but it's a home run. A home run. We'll get this ovation for Joe DiMaggio.
Robinson with a good lead. There he goes. He hits the dirt and he's safe.
Paso pitches. Williams swings. There's a high drive. It is a home run against the right field.
The 2-2 to May. The swing ground ball third base side. Brooks Robinson's got it throwing from foul ground toward first base.
It is in time.
It's fun. That's what it is. It's fun. Baseball is more fun than anything else. You can watch it and just love it and enjoy it. I don't think there's anything tremendously philosophical about it. I don't think there's anything metaphysical. I just think it's so much fun to watch. You watch a player do something. You watch a second baseman go up in the air in a double play and he throws the ball. And he's like a bird in flight. And he's watching to see what happened. You see a first baseman take a bad throw in the dirt and come up with it like that and sort of wander off the bag as if there's no problem at all. It's just delightful.
There's a long drive way back in center field. Way back. It is home. Willie Mays just brought this crowd to his feet with a catch, which must have been an optical illusion to a lot of people.
One summer day in 1839 at Cooperstown, New York, on the shores of Lake Otsego, the local academy was playing a game of town ball against Green's select school. The rules of town ball were so loose that every hit was fair, and boys sometimes ran headlong into one another. That day, an academy player named Abner Doubleday sat down and on the spot drew up the rules for a brand new game and called it baseball. Abner Doubleday would eventually become a hero at the Battle of Gettysburg, and his game would become the national pastime, or so the legend has it. Abner Doubleday really was a distinguished soldier, but he was at West Point, not Cooperstown that summer, never claimed to have had anything to do with baseball, may never have even seen a professional game. Baseball's real history is more complicated.
Baseball has nearly all the qualities and the narrative that the country has. It's competitive. It's spirited. It's got the joshing, and it's got the intellectual side, the great students of it. But it's also got labor unions and management and gimmicks and promotion and venality and great public fools in baseball and great public heroes and self-serving people and generous people. And it has pride and unity of town and of country, and it'll do for a figure for the American system.
1744. The ball once struck off, away flies the boy to the next destined post, and then home with joy.
Children have hit balls with bats as long as there have been children. But baseball's most direct ancestors were two British games: rounders, a children's sport brought to New England by the earliest colonists, and cricket, a stately pastime divided into innings and supervised by umpires. By the time of the American Revolution, there were many variations. Boys played one version or another in schoolyards and village greens and on college campuses.
1786. A fine day. Play ball in the campus, but am beaten, for I miss catching and striking the ball. Princeton College.
Of all baseball's ancestors, town ball was by far the most popular. Under its rules, the infield was square. 8 to 15 men played on a side, sometimes as many as 50. The pitcher or feeder was the least important player. It was his job to lob the ball to the striker, who could wait and wait for the pitch he wanted. The runner was out if the ball was caught on the fly, or if he was soaked, hit with the ball while running between bases. By 1800, town ball and its many variations were played nearly everywhere. On their way back from the Pacific Ocean, Lewis and Clark played a game of base with the Nez Perce Indians as they prepared to cross the Bitterroot Mountains. In the 1830s, on the western frontier of Missouri, ball was the favorite sport of Joseph Smith, the founder of a new religious sect called the Mormons. But back east in Cooperstown, New York, city fathers passed an ordinance restricting play after merchants complained about too many broken windows. Meanwhile, in New York City, they were starting to play a brand new version of the game.
There is the illusion that this connects us on a straight line to our rural past, our country past. And we have an image somewhere in the back of our minds of fathers and sons or boys playing baseball on a meadow somewhere. The truth of the matter is that baseball was an urban game almost from the beginning. Organized ball was played by men in cities near saloons.
In the 1840s, New Yorkers walked and worked and lived at what was called a railroad pace, for the thousands of single men pouring into the city in search of work. Their crowded world centered around boarding houses and saloons, volunteer fire companies and ward politics, and baseball teams. In September of 1845, as Americans now claimed the right to overspread the whole of the continent, a group of friends formed the New York Knickerbocker Baseball Club. They were merchants, brokers, insurance salesmen, a United States Marshal, a portrait photographer, a dealer in cigars. And they showed a lively interest in improving the game.
3 balls being struck at and missed, and the last one caught is a hand out. If not caught, is considered fair, and the striker bound to run. Alexander Joy Cartwright.
Alexander Joy Cartwright was a volunteer fireman and bank clerk working for Daniel Ebbets, the father of the man who would one day build Ebbets Field. He helped establish the Knickerbockers and codify new rules that would change the game forever. The infield would now be diamond-shaped. Foul lines were established, and the batter got 3 missed swings before he was called out. Most important, runners would now be tagged or thrown out, not thrown at. It was now a more challenging game, faster-paced, American, and to the Knickerbockers' great delight, quite distinct from cricket and rounders. But there was precious little room to play the new game in the crowded streets of Lower Manhattan, and the Knickerbockers had to travel across the Hudson River to Hoboken, New Jersey, and a grassy area called the Elysian Fields.
They crossed the Barclay Street ferry in a body, like unto the pilgrims of yore, and marched up the country road on the Jersey side, prospecting here and there for suitable grounds, until they reached the Elysian Fields, where they settled. Then they perfected their organization, calling it the Knickerbockers, which was the nucleus of the great American game of baseball. Seymour Church.
Twice a week we went over to the Elysian Fields for practice. Once there, we were free from all restraint, and throwing off our coats, we played until it was too dark to see any longer. I was a left-handed batter and sometimes used to hit the ball into the river. People began to take an interest in the game presently, and sometimes we had as many as 100 spectators watching.
By the following spring, the Knickerbockers were finally ready to take on another team. On June 19, 1846, at the Elysian Fields, they played against a group of cricket players in the first real baseball game in history. The Knickerbockers lost, 23-1, but their game spread throughout the city. By the 1850s, New York was baseball mad. There were teams of doctors, teams of teachers, teams of tradesmen. Shipbuilders formed clubs, so did firemen, bankers, teamsters, lawyers, even undertakers. Meanwhile, the Knickerbockers continued to refine their game. The winning team was the first to get 21 aces, or runs, soon changed to whoever was ahead at the end of 9 innings. They standardized the number of men who could play on a side at 9 and set the bases 90 feet apart. Alexander Joy Cartwright left Manhattan and helped spread baseball westward, across the Rockies, onto the California Gold Rush, then all the way to Hawaii. There, he became a wealthy merchant, but he never entirely lost interest in the team he'd helped to form or the game he'd helped lay out.
Honolulu. Dear old Knickerbockers. I hope the club is still kept up, and that I shall someday meet again with them on the pleasant fields of Hoboken. Have in my possession the original ball with which we used to play on Murray Hill. Sometimes I have thought of sending it home, but I cannot bear to part with it. So linked in with cherished home memories.
On December 5th, 1856, the Sunday New York Mercury referred to baseball for the first time, somewhat optimistically, as the national pastime.
Ball playing communicated such an impulse to our limbs and joints that there is nothing now heard of in our leisure hours but ball, ball, ball. I cannot prophesy with any degree of accuracy concerning the continuance of this rage for play, but the effect is good, since there's been a thoroughgoing reformation from inactivity and torpitude. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
There were some 50 clubs in the New York area alone by 1858, and special trains ran out to Long Island where onlookers saw the New York All-Stars beat their Brooklyn counterparts and for the first time were made to pay for the privilege, 50 cents, to the man who owned the field. In an attempt to keep control of their game, the Knickerbockers and other established clubs banded together to form the National Association of Baseball Players. They set down still more rules. An umpire was given the power to call strikes. No one was allowed to catch the ball in his cap. Above all, baseball was to remain an amateur's game. No player was ever to be paid. By the spring of 1861, there were 62 member clubs in the National Association of Baseball Players. Free blacks in northern cities had established their own teams. And Henry Chadwick was trying to start a baseball club in Richmond, Virginia, when the new season was suddenly interrupted.
Virginia, April 3rd, 1862. It is astonishing how indifferent a person can become to danger. The report of musketry is heard but a very little distance from us. Yet over there on the other side of the road is most of our company playing bat ball. And perhaps in less than half an hour, they may be called to play a ball game of a more serious nature. Frederick Fairfax, 5th Ohio Infantry.
Soldiers in both armies played ball whenever and wherever they could. Just like boys, one of them remembered.
If there was any transforming incident in the history of baseball, as in the history of this country, it was the Civil War. Play in the 1840s and 50s was not for the middle class. It was not for the working class. It was reserved for so-called gentlemen. Play became democratic when it became portable. It became a people's game.
A long winter's idleness and lack of practice were evident. With the war being over, it is hoped that there will be a renewal of interest in our own purely national game. Buffalo Express.
By the end of the Civil War, baseball was the national pastime, north and south, west as well as east. Soldiers took the game home with them, and it grew.
It's our game. That's the chief fact in connection with it. America's game has the snap, go, fling of the American atmosphere. It belongs as much to our institutions, fits into them as significantly as our Constitution's laws, is just as important in the sum total of our historic life. Walt Whitman.
In October 1867, as federal troops enforced civil rights laws in the South, the African-American Pythian Baseball Club of Philadelphia applied for membership in the Pennsylvania Association of Baseball Players. They were turned away. 2 months later, the National Association took up the issue.
If colored clubs were admitted, there would in all probability be some division of feeling. Whereas by excluding them, no injury could result to anyone.
Despite the ban, the Pythians became the first recorded all-black team to play a white team, the Philadelphia City Items, a group of newspapermen. The Pythians won 27-17. Their captain, Octavius Cato, was later killed in a Philadelphia race riot that started when blacks attempted to exercise their right to vote.
The public, so far as it knew of our playing, was shocked. But in our retired grounds, we continued to play in spite of a censorious public.
In 1866, at Vassar College, a group of freshmen, with the support of a female physician who thought exercise for women essential to good health, formed the Laurel and Abenakis Baseball Club. Other colleges soon followed suit.
They are getting up various clubs now for out-of-door exercise. They have a floral society, boat clubs, and baseball clubs. I belong to one of the latter, and enjoy it highly, I can assure you. Annie Glidden.
They did not play for long.
One day, a student, while running between bases, fell with an injured leg. We attended her to the infirmary with the foreboding that this accident would end our play of baseball. Dr. Webster said that the public doubtless would condemn the game as too violent, but that if the student had hurt herself while dancing, the public would not condemn dancing to extinction. Sophia Richardson.
The teams were soon forced to disband. The game was considered far too violent for young ladies to play.
Americans have always had a wonderful aversion to excesses of honesty. And baseball has always been able to express that. The sense in baseball is that the reason they put those 4 umpires out there is to enforce the rules. But if you can get outside the rules and outside the umpires, it is a very reasonable question to ask whether you might not be allowed to do it.
One afternoon on the Brooklyn waterfront, a boy named William Cummings, known to his friends as Candy, noticed that he could make a clamshell curve when he hurled it through the air, and began to wonder if he might be able to do the same thing one day with a baseball. In April 1867, now pitching for the Brooklyn Excelsiors, Andy Cummings tried out his new pitch.
I began to watch the flight of the ball through the air and distinctly saw it curve. A surge of joy flooded over me that I shall never forget. I said not a word. Saw many a batter at that game throw down his stick in disgust. Every time I was successful, I could scarcely keep from dancing for pure joy. The secret was mine. Candy Cummings.
Cummings' secret did not remain his for long. Though it was outlawed, everyone started throwing the curveball. Purists were appalled.
I heard that this year we at Harvard won the baseball championship because we have a pitcher who has a fine curveball. I am further instructed that the purpose of the curveball is to deliberately deceive the batter. Harvard is not in the business of teaching deception. Charles Eliot, president of Harvard College.
The public will happily pay 75 cents to $1.50 to go to the theater. And numbers prefer baseball to theatricals. We must make the games worth witnessing, and there will be no fault found with the price. A good game is worth 50 cents. A poor one is dear at 25. Harry Wright.
Harry Wright eats baseball, breathes baseball, thinks baseball, dreams baseball, and incorporates baseball in his prayers. Cincinnati Enquirer.
Harry Wright, a former center fielder for the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, believed there were big profits to be made in baseball. And in 1869, he assembled the very first professional team, the Cincinnati Red Stockings. Only one of Wright's Red Stockings actually came from Cincinnati. Most were young New Yorkers, 19 or 20 years old. Wright drilled them in the fundamentals, insisted they be silent and businesslike on the field, and dressed them in knickers to boost their running speed. And for the first time, to the shock of the baseball community, he paid each player a salary. The highest paid was Harry's brother George, the shortstop, who received a considerable sum of $1,400 a season, 7 times the average working man's wage. The Red Stockings finished their first season with a record of 65 wins and not a single loss. They also managed to turn a profit for their investors, $1.39.
The city that had once prided itself on the stockyards which inspired its nickname, Porkopolis, had become the baseball capital of the country. And the Red Stockings spread the gospel from New York to San Francisco, traveling on the just completed Transcontinental Railroad.
Every magnate in the country is indebted to this man, Harry Wright, for the establishment of baseball as a business, and every patron for furnishing him with a systematic recreation. Every player is indebted to him for inaugurating an occupation by which he gains a livelihood, and the country at large for adding one more industry to furnish employment: sporting life.
The Red Stockings seemed unbeatable. They won 27 straight the next season, too. And then they came to the Capitol Line grounds in Brooklyn to face the Atlantics, the best team in the East, and the toughest. Before 20,000 paying spectators, Cincinnati and Brooklyn fought to a 5-5 tie over 9 innings. It was the most exciting game anyone could ever remember. Under the rules, Harry Wright could have settled for a tie, but he decided to risk his record and try something new: extra innings. At first, the gamble seemed to pay off. Cincinnati scored 2 runs in the top of the 11th.
But then, with two Atlantics on base, the Cincinnati first baseman, Charles Gould, made a bad throw. By the time it was all over, Brooklyn scored 3 runs, and Cincinnati had been beaten.
June 14th. Telegram to the Cincinnati Commercial. Atlantics 8, Cincinnati 7. The finest game ever played. Our boys did nobly, but fortune was against us. Though beaten, not disgraced. Harry Wright.
Cincinnati was devastated. With their winning streak over, fans stopped going to Red Stockings games. Investors withdrew their support, complaining that with attendance down, the players' salary demands were unreasonable. Finally, the team was disbanded. Harry Wright moved on. At the invitation of a band of New England promoters, he took the best of his Red Stockings to Boston, where they became the most successful team in the country. By moving his stars from city to city, the Sporting Times later said, Wright had set new prices on their muscle.
Baseball is business now, and I'm trying to arrange our games to make them successful and make them pay. Irrespective of my feelings and to the best of my ability. If I should fail, then I will try and do better next time. Harry Wright.
For the professional teams and leagues that now sprung up all across the country, winning and the profits it promised was fast becoming the most important thing. But outside the big cities, baseball remained a game, not a business.
When we heard of a professional game in which men cared nothing whatever for patriotism but only for money, games in which rival towns would hire the best players from a natural enemy, we could scarcely believe the tale was true. No kinsman boy would any more give aid and comfort to a rival town than would a loyal soldier open a gate in the wall and let an enemy march in. Clarence Darrow, Kinsman, Ohio.
The aim of baseball is to employ professional players to perspire in public for the benefit of gamblers. The New York Times.
By the mid-1870s, a man could make a good living playing baseball, but some found they could make an even better living throwing games for gamblers. Speculators trading on inside information had taken over much of the professional game, just as they had taken over many other institutions, cornering the gold market, ruining the stock market, defrauding the government, creating huge monopolies. As the country approached its centennial celebration, public faith in its national pastime began to fade. Henry Chadwick, who had struggled so hard to promote baseball, now found himself crusading against corruption in the game he loved.
Baseball has fallen. Yes, the national game has become degraded. At certain match games, large amounts of money changed hands among the spectators. A noted New York club is said to have sold the results of a match. Barked chins and broken fingers may be easily mended, but a disfigured reputation may never be entirely repaired. Once more, abandon the bat, boys, if you cannot keep the game pure.
On February 2nd, 1876, at Manhattan's Grand Central Hotel, a group of club owners, eager to tighten their control of the game, restore its respectability, and most of all to ensure greater profits, started a new association.
They called it the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs.
It is ridiculous to pay ball players $2,000 a year, especially when the $800 boys often do just as well. William Hulbert.
William A. Hulbert, a ruthless coal magnate who owned the Chicago White Stockings, became the National League's president. He immediately took steps to revive the reputation of the professional game. Players were forbidden to drink on the field or off. No beer was to be served on the grounds. Gambling was barred. Ticket prices were set at 50 cents, and no games were to be played on Sundays. Above all, power was to be invested in the owners, not the players. To further solidify their control, the owners added a reserve clause to the contracts of the 5 best men on every team. It required that each play only for his current employer and reserved his services for the following year. At first, few complained. To be reserved was to be sure of a job for the coming season. Those who did complain that the reserve clause smacked of slavery were fired, then blacklisted. For the first time in the history of the game, the players would serve the interests of the owners. For the next 100 years, the professional game would be dominated by those who owned the field and supplied the ball. Players would simply be employees.
It is not known whether the players have been dissipating, keeping late hours, and having a jolly time generally. But tight or sober, they should realize the fact that they run afoul of a most humiliating set of reverses. Louisville Courier-Journal.
After a spectacular early season in 1877, the Louisville Grays of the new National League mysteriously lost 7 games in a row. Players bobbled the ball, seemed to slow between bases, swung suspiciously wide. The Grays lost the pennant. Afterwards, some were seen wearing fancy clothes and diamond stick pins. An investigation revealed that gamblers had bought off 4 players, including one of the National League's greatest pitchers, the popular Jim Devlin. When confronted with the evidence, Devlin confessed.
I was introduced to a man named McLeod, who said when I wanted to make a little money to let him know. Was to use the word sash in telegraphing, and he would know what was meant. We made a contract to throw a game in Indianapolis. Received $100 from McLeod for it. And gave it to my wife.
The magnitude of the conspiracy stunned the baseball world. The Louisville Grays suspended the accused players, who claimed they had only done it because their owners had failed to pay them their wages. Devlin was brought before National League President William Hulbert.
Devlin was in tears. Hulbert was in tears. I saw Hulbert take a $50 bill and press it into the palm of the prostrate player. And then I heard him say, "That's what I think of you personally. But damn you, Devlin, you are dishonest. You have sold a game, and I can't trust you. Now go and let me never see your face again, for your act will not be condoned so long as I live. Albert Goodwill Spaulding."
Despite their pleas for forgiveness, Hulbert banned all 4 players from baseball forever. For 5 years, Jim Devlin haunted the corridors outside meetings of the National League club owners, hoping somehow to be reinstated. Desperate, he wrote to Harry Wright, still the most respected man in the game.
Mr. Harry Wright, dear sir, as I am deprived from playing this year, I thought I would write you to see if you could do anything for me in the way of looking after your ground or anything in the way of work. I don't know what I'm to do. I can assure you, Harry, that I was not treated right. I am honest, Harry. You need not be afraid. The Louisville people made me what I am today, a beggar. I have not got a stitch of clothing, or has my wife and child. I am dumb, Harry. I don't know how to go about it, so I trust you will answer this and do all you can for me. So I still close by sending you and George and all the boys my very best wishes, hoping to hear from you soon. I am yours truly, James A. Devlin.
Harry Wright did nothing. Devlin got a job as a policeman in 1880, but died of consumption just 3 years later. His early death, said a Louisville newspaper, was an instructive example of the fruits of crookedness. The National League had survived its first scandal.
If anywhere in this world the social barriers are broken down, it is on the ball field. There, many men of low birth and poor breeding are the idols of the rich and cultured. The best man is he who plays best. In view of these facts, the objection to colored men is ridiculous. If social distinctions are to be made, half the players in the country will be shut out. Better make character and personal habits the test. Newark Call.
African Americans, freed from slavery by the Civil War and filled with hope for a better future and freedom, soon found themselves prisoners again of white prejudice in the North and of Jim Crow laws in the South that segregated every aspect of their lives. Even games of baseball at an orphanage. But freed blacks formed their own baseball clubs in cities north and south. One of Frederick Douglass's sons played for a team in Washington, D.C. And more than 50 blacks played professional baseball alongside whites during the 1870s and 80s. But it was never easy. In 1884, the son of a black Ohio clergyman, Moses Fleetwood Walker, became the first African American to make it all the way to the majors. Walker joined the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association as a catcher and immediately ran into a wall of bigotry. The Irish pitcher, Tony Mullane, ignored Walker's signals because he said he wouldn't take orders from a black man. Cap Anson himself tried to have Walker ejected from an exhibition game, threatening not to play if they didn't get that nigger off the field. Anson only backed down when he realized he'd forfeit his pay if he really did walk out. At one game, the Toledo manager received a letter said to be from 75 determined men who threatened to mob Fleet Walker if he dared make an appearance. Walker kept playing. His brother, Welday, joined the team for a time. 1887 signaled the beginning of the end for black Americans in organized white baseball. When it seemed likely that the New York Giants would hire the black pitcher, George Stovey, Cap Anson made it clear that neither he nor any of his white stockings would ever play a team on which blacks were welcome.
Just why Adrian C. Anson was so strongly opposed to colored players on white teams cannot be explained. His repugnant feeling toward colored ball players and his opposition with his great power and popularity in baseball circles hastened the exclusion of the black man from the white leagues. Sol White.
Rather than face a revolt by Anson and other white players, the National League owners made a gentleman's agreement to sign no more blacks. The minor leagues followed suit, formally declaring that black players would no longer be welcome. Almost overnight, Moses, Fleetwood, Walker, and all the other black players disappeared from organized white baseball. A few years later, the United States Supreme Court itself would rule that racial segregation was legal everywhere. It would be 60 years before another black man played in the major leagues.
If I had not been quite so black, I might have caught on as a Spaniard or something of that kind. My skin is against me. Bud Fowler.
By 1900, Walt Whitman and Alexander Joy Cartwright and Harry Wright had died. Baseball had grown from a children's game to a brawling pastime for big city workers to an industry. And the names and deeds of its greatest heroes had become familiar in every American home. But now, jealousy and greed among the owners, who held a monopoly on Major League Baseball, threatened to destroy all that they had built. The public was turning to other sports, where the amateur spirit had not been lost. It would take a new generation of baseball players, stars who would come to represent the best and the worst of the new 20th century, to rescue the national pastime. By 1900, Ty Cobb and Casey Stengel and George Herman Ruth had been born.